picked us up, drove us to some little small town somewhere, and just dropped us off at a hotel and said, yeah, check in. You guys should be able to book a room here. You know, we'll pick you up in, I think, like 2 days or whatever for the first show. And I'm like, are we having to pay for the hotel? Like, I'm unsure. And I've got like no money. I probably would have had a little bit, but not much. I didn't have any Austrian shillings, I guess, because we started in Austria. I had no credit card. And thankfully, as we were just getting our bags out of Otto's car, he's like, you guys have shillings, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, you're not. I'm like, no. So he reaches in, pulls his wallet out and hands me like what's probably like $100 and says, well, we'll take that out of your first pay. I'm like, okay, thank you. And they basically just drove off. And there's me and this Japanese kid who doesn't speak practically any English. I speak zero Japanese, other than perhaps, you know, Ohio and kudasai, hello, morning and thank you. And it's like, or is that actually, that's please, not thank you. So we go inside and I'm terrified. It's like, can I even afford a room? It's like, I have no money. And we checked in, and I had bought a travel guide book that did say that most rooms came with a free breakfast, which was often just coffee and, you know, buns and jam. So I'm like, oh, maybe I can eat in the morning. And Hero and I decided to, like, do you want to go try to find food? And we went walking. And this is before Google, before phones and internet and shit. And we're just wandering around aimlessly trying to find some place where we can get food, because the hotel, other than their morning thing, had nothing. And we're like hungry. And we walked for like an hour or so and finally found a grocery store, and I bought like, 2 bananas and something. And we came back. I was fucking terrified. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? And thankfully, in the morning when I got up and I went down, and there was buns and jam and coffee, which was like a feast for me at the time. And there was Larry Cameron, who I recognized from Stampede Television. And I sat down and talked with him, and he sort of explained the situation, that you don't have to pay until you actually check out and leave. When Otto pays you cash every 2 shows, so you'll have money. Don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, thank God. Now, it didn't help me find food the rest of the part of the day. I pretty much survived on my couple of buns and some jam with a cup of coffee in the morning. And that was my start in Europe. And to make it worse, again, the pay was to be $1,000 US a week, which seemed to be fairly standard of my European trips. But as it turns out, the very first day we get to the show and Otto pulls us into the room and he explains that, he'll pay us in shillings or marks, depending on whether we're in Austria and Germany. And he says, with the exchange rate is never an exact amount. You always have to round up or round down. And I'm going to round down. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Paying
and then we
marks,
find,
all right.
But he did say, if you guys end up, because it was me and Hero, if you guys end up working out and I like your work because I don't know who you are, it's like, then we'll round up. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But also, too, this was a bit of a misnomer, and Joe didn't even know, because when I explained it to him later, he was not aware. Otto's $1,000 a week, he actually divides that by 7 and pays you that much per show. And if there's no show, you get no money. So again, I showed up, and it was 2 days before we even had our first show, and then we had like a couple shows, and then there was 3 days off before we had our next show. So I'm already thinking, it's like, I'm making no fucking money here. And we had our first match, and this was great too, because Joe was, he's a New Japan guy, right? He's explaining to Hero and I that, CWA is very strong, very stiff, territory. Your work must be very strong style, stiff. And we're like, okay. And we worked each other, so we went out there and had a very stiff, beat the hell out of each other match, and came back, and Joe was happy, and Otto was like, oh, very good, Joe. You bring me 2 good boys. Good job, Joe. And I'm thinking, great, he's going to round up. No, he never rounded up. That ended up being about $50 less a week, minus also the days you didn't work. But there was a battle royal that night afterward, after the singles match. We get in the battle royal and found out that this was the lightest territory I'd ever been to. And Joe just wanted us to beat the shit out of each other. So Hero and I had to wait till Joe went home before we could start working light again. But we were off and running in Europe. And again, I'm lost. I've never been away this long. And I'm talking to the guys and they're like, well, once we get to Graz, which was the first part of the big tournament, we did like a couple indie shots before it. Then we'll be working, 6 or 7 nights a week. Money will be better. I'm like, okay. But again, they just dump us at a hotel. And I think it was me, Hero, and Anthony Durante, Pitbull 2, were the only ones actually staying in the hotel. Because all the European guys just had, caravans and trailers that would stay at campsites that were cheaper. And they'd have kitchens and shit that was good. And it's like, we had nothing. Like when I got dropped at the hotel in Graz, they're like, yeah, the building is, they gave me the name of the building and I'd get a map. It's like a tourist map where it's a cartoon map of the city with like the important big buildings sort of larger so you could see them. And I realized that it's like, I don't know, it's like a 2 or 3 mile walk down this road from the hotel to the building. And there's a train, which costs money. And I'm like, I'm not paying anything. I'm barely breaking even here as I'm in Europe. So I'm like walking to and from and having to eat at McDonald's and shit. And it's like, I'm miserable because it's like, I'm not making any money. It's like, I'm breaking even. I'm making some money, but I'm, keeping the food budget thin. And it wasn't until, I guess Graz was pretty good because it was like 6 weeks, 7 days a week. So it's like I started making some money there. But again, with them not taking care of you, and again, the European guys are fine because they had their own cars and their trailers and stuff. But I found out at the end of Graz that I had to find my own way to Vienna. And I'm like, what? And again, you don't have a Google to vote, hey, train ticket to...
You didn't have your iPhone?
I didn't have my iPhone in 1993.
Fuck, you couldn't Uber?
Nope.
Wow.
So... Hero and I managed to, with, asking a few guys and getting help, managed to catch a cab to a train station and managed to find the appropriate train to get us to Vienna. But it was just like, no phone, no credit card, a little bit of money, and you're just trying, like if we got lost, it's like I would have no means by which to contact anybody. It was crazy. But it was wrestling. And the upside of it, to not just make it seem like a horrible trip, it was 1993, so I was it was like 2.5 years in because I broke in the end of 90. And I think I had like 120 matches in the first 2.5 years of my career. In the next 5 months, because I ended up coming home early, I'll explain that when I get there. In the next 5 months, I had more than 120 matches. So it's like the improvement in my work with, getting 120 matches in like 5 months really made a difference. But it was like, what an eye-opener to the difference between being taken care of and chauffeured around to, yeah, you're on your own, find your way to these different cities. And it's like in Vienna, thankfully, August Schmiesel, an Austrian powerlifter wrestler guy, found us a youth hostel that actually had a bit of a kitchen, which made staying even cheaper for us, which was great. And it's like, I wish I had a pedometer in my Fitbit back then too, because I bet you I walked 20 miles a day everywhere. I wrote a letter home to my wife pretty much every day just for partially something to do and partially for my sanity because I was very homesick. But again, it's like I had no TV, I had no radio, I had no phone, no internet. And I was like, it was just the isolation was crazy. And with the vast majority of the talent being guys that stayed at the campsites, it's like it's just me, Hero, and Anthony Durante. And even before too long, he ended up staying with a girlfriend, I think. So it was like, it was crazy. I'd walk to the post office and mail a letter just to do something. And we worked. And again, Vienna was 8 weeks outside, 6 days a week. So 1 day a week I would sightsee. And Vienna was an incredible city. So that was really cool, but it was like such a culture shock. And even we wrestled in rounds. And tapping was a thing. And tapping wasn't a thing in North America in 1993.
This was 93?
Yeah. So it's like, we wrestle in rounds. I'm like, what? How the hell do we do this? So they sort of give me But I remember my first match too, and if you remember, I think we discussed this on the show before, if you go back and watch WrestleMania 10, Brett taps out halfway through the match with Owen.
Yeah, they tapped all the time.
Because he'd bang the mat in his Well, I'm in Europe and wrestling a match, and someone puts me in a bear hug, and I'm selling, and Mick McMichael, the ref, screaming, it's like, you're giving up, boy, what are you doing? Why are you so... I'm like, what? He's like, don't tap. I'm like, what? So it's like I just sort of stopped doing everything. So I'm like, what the fuck am I doing wrong? Why is he yelling at me?
Referee's discretion.
Yeah, well, it was one match in a tournament, wouldn't have mattered that much. And I got to the back and I'm like, what are you talking about? And then he explained to me, and it was very specific over there. It had to be 3 times.
Oh God, not this.
But you would use it to indicate how much pain you were in. So if you locked me in, like, say, a Boston Crab, I'd sell for a while and I might bang the mat once. And it would sort of indicate that you're a third of the way to the pain level required for you to tap. And if he applies more pressure, you might bang the mat twice and the crowd would be like, oh man, he's real close to tapping now. And then, you could do the tap twice and then not quite, like you do with a near fall with a pin, where it's like your hand didn't quite hit the mat. It's like always so close. And if you banged it 3 times, the match was over, which worked great psychology-wise because the crowd was into it. And it's like,
is this why I have to hear these fuckers talking about this in 2023 when we see something weird in a wrestling match? So let's get it straight. These were the rules in CWA Catch in 1993?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because that ain't how it's done in jiu-jitsu. It's not how it's done in American pro wrestling. So quit trying to bring that shit up in 2023 in WWE or AEW. God. Has to be 3 times. I heard that last year for something. I was like, no, it doesn't. That's bullshit.
Now, someone told me this weekend that in the original UFC that it had to be 4.
I don't have any recollection.
I have no idea if you go back to UFC 1 or not, but that was the thing. But again, the rings were stiff, so my body was hurting, not making a lot of money, missing home. So I was not particularly happy for the good first part of this. And then there was also tension, because this was back, again, in the early 90s of you have to go drink with the boys. You have to go drink with the boys. And I didn't drink, so there was tension there as well. And Larry Cameron convinced me to go out the last night in Graz. I wasn't going to drink, but I was going to go. And I went out with Larry Cameron, Eddie Gilbert, Road Warrior Hawk, Anthony Durante, and myself. So it was the 5 of us. And sadly, I'm the only one still with us. But I remember that night too, because it's like, okay, I'm out at the bar, and I'm like, I kind of wanted to buy the first round as a sort of a nice gesture, but it's like, I didn't know if I had enough money. So, and Larry jumped in and bought the first round, and Hawk bought another round, and it's like I just had a Coke, and I think by that point I was pretty much looking for my exit strategy. But I remember hearing that Eddie Gilbert, I had heat with Gilbert because he thought as the young guy I should have been buying drinks for the veterans all night, and was not happy that I didn't.
What a gimmick.
Yeah, and I remember it was in the afternoon earlier, Road Warrior Hawk. He had the different mindset of, I know I'm the guy, the top star here making the big money, so don't worry about it. And he'd actually went out and bought like a case of steaks and taken it to the campground and did a big barbecue for all the guys, because Hawk was just brought in for the big main event last show and probably made more for that show than I did for my 6 months. But I remembered that later in my career to be more the guy, if you're the highest paid guy on the card, maybe pick up the tab for the guys that are struggling. But even just, and again, to give people a bit of a frame of reference, I'm paid cash every second day. So I've got cash on me, and it's like, you walk into the office at the beginning of the show, they give you cash, and you got to just leave it in your, in your pocket when you go out to wrestle. And Stampede was not in a very honest territory. They ribbed you and took stuff and treated like shit at times. So it's like I was nervous about that. But then you're just at a 2-bit hotel, or later staying in a caravan behind, the building in Hanover, just little trailers. And it's like I'm starting to develop a bit of a wad of cash, and I'm like hiding it in my trailer while I go to the show. And eventually I'm like, I got to send money home because my girlfriend needs, my half of rent. There's no online banking. So it's like, I got to send money home. And I had to go to, I think when I talked to my wife on the phone, I had to find an international phone and phone home. And my wife asked at the bank in Calgary how I would do it. And I guess CIBC, is who we bank with, said that they have a partnership with Deutsche Bank. I don't remember. So I had to find a Deutsche Bank, and they could do a money transfer for me. So every month or so, I'd have my wad of cash getting really big, and I'd start getting nervous that someone might break into my trailer and steal my money. And I'd wander to the